Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the From Adversity to Abundance podcast. I am your host, Jamie Bateman, and I'm thrilled today to have with us Chris Steer, the founder of Steer LLC. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Jamie. It's good to be with you, my friend.
Well, I appreciate that, and thanks for joining us. I know you're a busy guy, and so we do appreciate your time. And for a little bit of context, Chris and I go back a long ways, actually. Known each other for many years. We I guess met in college back at Johns Hopkins. We were on the same lacrosse team. And funny enough, I found a lacrosse ball in my son's room the other day that had Terry Reardon, Brian Picola, and Dave Marr had signed this lacrosse ball. I'm not sure how we still have that.
That's too funny. That is too funny. Jamie,
Anyway.
I recently saw those guys, by the way.
Did you really?
Remember the smoker? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
First time I had gone in probably a decade or more and saw those guys. But anyway.
Gotcha. So yeah, we can chat offline. Obviously, the listener doesn't need to hear us reminisce about, but those were some good times. And that was a fantastic lacrosse team we were both a part of. I think you were a senior when I was a freshman. So we all looked up to you guys. And so anyway, Chris, what do you do today? What's your business do? Give us some context. Why should we listen to you?
Yeah. I am so grateful, Jamie, to be able to do. I'm reminded of a Picasso quote. Picasso said, at least it's attributed to him, said the meaning of life is to find your purpose, right? Is to find your gift, rather. And the purpose of life is to give it away. So the meaning of life to find your gift, the purpose of life to give it away. And I feel like I'm in that zone right now where I help leaders build better organizations. And these are typically small to mid-market for-profit and nonprofit organizations that they partner with me to build better leaders, build better managers, build better strategies, build better approaches to optimizing their business.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, and we'll certainly later dive in a little bit more on your business, but what does you already touched on it, but what does your typical client look like?
Yeah. Typical client is usually founder-led. If it's a for-profit company, it's still probably founder-led, with a multi-generational family business, Jamie. Okay. So the typical size of a for-profit client is going to be, $250 million or less. That'll be usually the high watermark in terms of revenue. Sure. But more importantly, it's led by people who want to be better, who want to ensure that they're not being wed to their existing paradigms or biases about how they lead and run their business.
That's really good.
And then we also work with nonprofits as well. And they are of varying sizes and across a lot of different industries.
Got it. So it's not so much really about what the business does per se. It's more about it sounds to me like it's more about the humans, the people inside the business and the mindset of those leaders and those people.
Yeah, that's well said. That's definitely a fair characterization.
Gotcha. So awesome. Like I said, we'll dive into that more in a bit. But let's jump back to your backstory a little bit. I know you and I spoke briefly before we hit record about a couple of different types of adversity that you've been through. And, the podcast From Adversity to Abundance, we're not here to, beat anybody up or tear anyone down. The point is to lift each other up. And through your story, Chris, we can encourage the listener out there. And when they're going through a hard time or when they're going to be going through a hard time in the future, as far as relationship, financial, business related type, health related struggles and that type thing. And obviously this ties into I think in your case, your business and your family life are all kind of interconnected. So let's jump back. Where do you want to start?
I actually thought of one more instance, Jamie, which you and I share in common. I'll start there, but it's going to be a little bit about, the emotional health, the mental health, some professional adversity to go along with some of those emotional, mental, physical health pieces too. So health and professional. But there's one more that
Yeah.
I wanted to speak to, which really, our origin story of our relationship
Yeah.
on a Division I lacrosse team. It was the first substantive adversity that I had dealt with in my life, other than the loss of a grandparent,
Mm.
was coming into what I had perceived in my very narrow view of the world to be my number one goal in life, which was to play at Hopkins,
Mm.
a
Mhm.
storied program.
Sure.
And coming into that program thinking that I would play right away and this was going to be
Mm.
great, and I would be a 4-time All-American, and this was going to be awesome.
Mhm.
Um, and the incredible um, dichotomy of my expectation and what I dealt with for the first, couple years
Yeah.
within that.
I
And
can relate.
yeah, and Jamie,
Yeah.
you and I, like, that is a very, very much a high level of emotional labor that I was not prepared for. And
Sure.
did not have good coping strategies. It was a real shock. And while it may seem to some listeners that that's a different kind of adversity, it's
Yeah.
adversity nonetheless.
For sure.
And a
Yeah.
very tough lesson for someone who had been building to this point their
Yeah.
entire life. Like, this is
Absolutely.
what I wanted to do.
Yeah. I've talked to previously about when I got out of college after I had transferred from Hopkins, but once we choked in the quarterfinals at Gettysburg my senior year, and the point is, season's over, career's over, graduate, boom, my whole identity is kind of gone, really. If so I think a lot of people cannot relate to that because they don't understand kind of what we put into that, to the sport, and to just the amount of work and commitment we had. But yeah, absolutely. My first couple of years at Hopkins, my year and a half that I was there, did not go so well from a lacrosse standpoint. So that can be, like you said, you've built everything up to that point. I mean, Hopkins is, like you said, a storied. I mean, it's the best of the best as far
It's the
as,
best of the best. Yeah.
so talk to us a little bit more about that. Like,
Yeah.
so it sounds like, and I obviously know a little bit, but it sounds like your college career didn't at least start out the way you anticipated. Is that fair to say?
It is very fair to say. And while as I reflect, I'm proud of some of the resilience and the work ethic required to get myself in a better position over my 4-year career there. Jamie, if I had access to a podcast like this, or
Mm-hmm.
a thinker like you at that time, I would have been so much better served. My mental and emotional health would have been a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
I
Sure.
would have been able to deal with the opportunity more than I did. And so, I had some intermittent playing time my
Mm-hmm.
first couple of years, and that
Mm-hmm.
was a really hard hit to my ego.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I first really learned about true disappointment. A lot of people relate to these Olympic stories, these people who have trained their entire lives for one moment and then they fall or they get
Sure.
injured, right?
Yeah.
It's really no different than what you and I did in
Mm-hmm.
preparing to play at Hopkins, right? And
For sure.
so that was a crushing blow that I didn't expect, and those are the blows that land the heaviest.
Sure.
And so working through that was a very torturous time.
Mm.
And in retrospect, you see the growth that comes from that.
Sure.
But let me tell you, brother, like, that was
It's
hard.
not easy to see it at the time.
No.
So I mean, like I said, you were there for the first year I was at Hopkins, and you were a very positive role model, positive influence. So I'm curious, from your freshman year to your senior year,
Yeah.
if you can recall, how did your
Yeah.
mindset change? How did your approach change?
Yeah. And gosh, if just to think about how much better I would have been to myself than knowing what I know now. But at that time, it was my only default operation, or default mode, Jamie, was to outwork
Mm.
um, and use it as fuel.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I felt this slight from the coaching staff, and I used that as fuel. So,
Gotcha.
outwork everybody. And
Hmm.
I think my mantra became, Jamie, don't give the staff a choice.
Hmm.
Don't give
Sure.
them a choice, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I had to do. And I've been able to pass this along to my kids and people and young athletes that I've coached over the last 30 years. But
Hmm.
it is a heavy burden to be thrust into a position where you're trying to live your lifelong dream, and that dream is being controlled outside of your
Hmm.
realm.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and it's not a fair game. And so my standard had to be here,
Hmm.
and others had to be here. And
Hmm.
so that's a different kind of labor beyond trying to outwork everybody and outperform everybody. And so
Sure.
having to do that was an incredible rigor that I was not planning on, to steel
Yeah.
my resolve and my mindset. So I
Gotcha.
think that's what essentially worked for
Hmm.
me at that
Yeah.
time.
And for the listeners unfamiliar, again, Hopkins and your senior year, I mean, the team was number 1 in the country. This we're not talking about a joke of a team here. This is one of
No,
the best teams that's ever been assembled in Division One. And so okay, so then obviously there's a lot more we could unpack,
sure.
with that. But how did you kind of after you graduated, what
Mhm.
occurred and from that point on?
Yeah. So I think the capstone to that part of the adversity was, and this is things that we still, ruminate on even to this day, Jamie. Once you've committed so much time to being an athlete like that, that stays with you forever. But
Sure.
I ended up being, as you know, because we were teammates, I was
Yeah.
a captain my senior year.
Yeah.
And that is not the design that I had.
Mm.
Like, I wanted to be an All-American.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
captaincy part was,
Yeah.
didn't think about that.
Sure.
In retrospect, I'm more proud of that,
Hmm.
because guess who voted for that? You guys,
Sure.
right? Like my
Absolutely.
teammates, right?
Yeah.
So that has been an incredible piece. And it's
That's
been a driver. And you and I both have taken our athletic experiences
mhm.
and
Oh
and
yeah,
and and pulled those through
for
into our
sure.
professional realms. And
No,
that,
that's a really good point. I can relate to so much that you just said, but yeah, and looking back, being a captain is really more about leadership and serving, and it's really less about you,
right?
right? And whereas being an All-American is awesome, but
Yeah.
but it's all about the accolade and the individual. So it's a different. I think I agree that the leadership role has such a bigger, longer lasting impact. And yeah, I've taken so many lessons from team sports and applied
Mm.
that in leadership positions. And there's so much that is so valuable in real life from team sports for sure. So no, I mean, like I said, you were a great role model and a very positive influence, and clearly, you know, you must have worked pretty hard over those 4 years. I mean,
Yeah.
just to get where you did by your
Yeah.
senior year. So,
Yeah.
so walk us through kind of
Yeah.
after Hopkins then.
Sure. So I was, my next step in my professional career was in financial services, which I was in for about a year or so. Some people will remember these terms that listen. I went and got my Series 7,
Mm.
63, and 65, which just means I'm able to be a
Hmm.
broker, a stockbroker, and to
Yeah.
sell insurance, et cetera, in a Baltimore firm called Legg Mason.
Hmm.
Worked for some banks for about a year or so, Jamie, and then I moved to Northern Virginia to work for an association on Capitol Hill, which was a
Okay.
great experience, which really drove my interest in, which was my undergraduate interest as well, which was going to law school, which I did.
Mm.
Graduated from University of Maryland School of Law, through some great relationships through Hopkins. Worked
Hmm.
for a firm with some Hopkins graduates for about 8 to 10 years. And that was an amazing learning journey. And I
Hmm.
think, Jamie, part of what do I value so much about the content that you're putting out there is that so much of adversity is where the growth happens, and
Hmm.
where the learning happens. And I just feel like if I look back on life, there's these different sections of
Hmm.
learning, right?
Sure.
the adversity, and even when there were not, the adversity wasn't present.
Yeah.
It's just chunked up into learning. So practice law, and then found myself advising businesses. And then that appealed to me more. Being a part of the business aspect appealed to me more than the advisory aspect, from the legal perspective. So I got involved in some entrepreneurial efforts and some organizations, which was amazing. And so I either started or partnered in several startup companies for several years, and then it continued to do so. But then I turned my perspective and some of the things that I'd accumulated as a lawyer and an entrepreneur and an operator into consulting practices, because I love to coach and help other leaders. And so that's sort of that brings you sort of to bring to date.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I mean, it's, again, we could go down so many different rabbit holes, and there's a lot there, and it's you know, I love that you essentially said that there's seasons, or seasons in life, and whether it's from a personal or professional perspective, but just a period where you spent 8 or 10 years at this law firm, learned a ton there, and then kind of transitioned more to the business side of things. So what did that, okay, so, and I know there's a ton you glossed right over. But how did you really come to that conclusion that you loved just helping the entrepreneur?
Yeah. I think it came where I saw the freedom of the entrepreneur. Believe me, we all know, you and I know this full well, Jamie, that yes, there's freedom, and yes, there's autonomy.
There's a lot of work.
There's a lot that comes with it. There's
a lot of stress and a lot of work, for sure. Yeah. No, that's, we try to keep it real on this show. It's not all just, oh, I just started a business and then I sold it for $5 million and now I sit on the beach.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I will say, man, it's like, I didn't want to be, at that point I was, the legal practice, the legal profession is driven by the billable hour. And so I just felt more of this symbiotic relationship with entrepreneurs. And so that's what I got pulled into. But, that's not when the adversity stops, right? So the adversity comes in a little bit of the micro version when you go through these professional transitions. But they can also become more acute when you have challenging partnerships and challenging times in your business, which cause this great deal of stress and anxiety. And I certainly had those. And one in particular, when I had to leave a partnership abruptly, because the dynamic was just not healthy.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure there's some you can't talk about or don't want to dive into there, but how did you, let's back up for a second. So how did you form that partnership? Because, speak to the person who's out there that may be looking for a partnership in business, not a deal partner, but an actual business partnership.
Right.
How did you approach that partnership, and what would you have done differently looking back?
That's a great question. I just keep getting wiser with age, buddy. I mean, I'm so much better. I think I'm so much better at picking partners. But no, I think at the end of the day, I was at that earlier stage in my entrepreneurial career, I was probably overvaluing the expedience of the opportunity in front of me versus valuing the relationship and how we would be able to serve one another.
Gotcha.
And that became more acute as we added partners. But it's you've got to be able to have power over yourself, right? And I felt that there was moments where I was doing too much emotional labor and not controlling. What's the old quote? The most powerful man in the world is the man who has power over himself. And I was struggling with that, given some of the dynamics of the business and the personalities involved.
Gotcha.
So I think I came out of that, and it was a very highly stressful time, a lot
Mhm.
of emotional labor, and that took a toll
Took a toll personally and on your family, or
emotionally,
yeah,
physically,
yeah,
not healthy. And,
gotcha.
you need to recover from that,
Yeah.
right? There's a recovery time. You need to be aware. And I think for all the entrepreneurs that are part of your listenership,
Hmm.
it's really arming yourself with really good tools and strategies and wisdom to
Hmm.
be able to lean on, in those moments. And again, I think back to the two examples I've given so far, Jamie.
Sure.
I was ill-equipped,
Sure.
to handle it better.
Right. Right. And it's really, it's not fair in some sense to look back and, with with the tools you have now and to
Yeah,
judge your old self. Cause we
right.
hopefully we are growing and learning as we progress through this thing
Right.
called, we call life. Right.
Yeah.
Um, so and just before we move on from that, maybe what type of business or how long were you in that business?
I was in
And,
that business for it was a how can I describe it effectively? It was a contract negotiation platform.
okay.
And
Hmm.
we pivoted the business over 5 years
Hmm.
into healthcare purchasing consulting.
Hmm. Okay.
And that was the industry. So you had to know a lot about contract, you had to
Hmm.
know a lot about negotiation, you had to know a lot about healthcare. Um,
That's
so it
that's a
was
lot to know.
it's a lot to know,
Yeah,
and I was there for about 5 years.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So and just was it clear pretty early on that this maybe wasn't the right move, or was it more of a gradual thing that you
Incremental. Yeah,
got it? Okay,
yeah.
got it. And then so and then you moved on, and I know that I'm sure that wasn't an easy thing to do, but you
No,
separated from that partnership and moved on. And then what did
no.
things look like for you after that?
Yeah, I think part of one of the things that I like to operate and I like to consult with all of my clients about operating from a position of strength. And
Mm. Hmm.
when I left that partnership in my haste to be out of the environment,
Hmm.
I wasn't operating from a position of strength
Mm.
in terms of giving myself bandwidth and intentional discernment
Mm.
about what to do next.
That's really
That
good. I mean,
that that's not something
that's
I advocate.
yeah, right. No, but sounds like in hindsight, again, we're picking you apart,
Sure.
and it's
Yeah.
easy,
Yeah.
to play Monday morning quarterback here. But it sounds like getting into that partnership and getting out of it, maybe you were impatient a little bit, or I don't know, rush things on some level. And I know I've made a ton of mistakes in that regard as far
Mm.
as just getting impatient. But so as far as exiting the partnership,
Mm.
could you have done it more slowly or differently, or how would you have done that
I
differently?
definitely could have done it in a more thoughtful
Mm.
way.
Hmm. Gotcha.
And for sure. And it would have reduced some of my anxiety, some
Hmm.
of the anxiety of my family, I'm sure.
Hmm.
As you can shelter it, you can compartmentalize all you want, but some things seep through.
Sure.
And so I would have done that in a more thoughtful and less emotional way,
Yeah. Got it.
for sure. And that experience has served me extraordinarily well,
Mm.
since then. But I do think it was one thing that we need to talk about more, and I know you do, which I'm
Hmm.
grateful for, is that you've really got to talk about the mental health of the entrepreneur.
Sure. Absolutely. No, I'm glad you said that. I know there's so much to unpack. And just to be a little bit vulnerable here, we're personally going through some things at home with mental health, very very close to home, which is so I've been this is top of mind for me.
Yeah.
And I recently was listening to a podcast about mental health and entrepreneurs, actually, and it's pretty fascinating that I think it sounds like data wise, there's a much higher rate of mental health issues among
Mhm.
entrepreneurs as compared to kind of the average citizen, if you will. And that's not to
Yep.
say there's not a problem across the board, right? But generally speaking, there's a lot of mental health challenge within the entrepreneur space. So I know you know a ton about this, and just
Yeah.
from your professional
Yep.
studies and things like that. So yeah, speak to us about that.
Yeah. It ends. Here's what's interesting, man. Like 10 years ago, there's no way I would be spending the amount of time that I do working with CEOs of companies of all sizes, but especially the early stage and the small to mid market entrepreneur
Hmm.
owner.
Hmm.
How much time we talk about this,
Hmm.
right? Because some of the things that drive entrepreneurs to be successful are the same things that you have to be mindful of for your own mental health,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
This intrinsic motivation, this drive, this
Hmm.
ethic, this cycling on certain things,
Hmm.
this hyper focus at times.
Yeah,
It has to be measured, or else we lose our power, right? We
yeah,
lose our discernment. We lose the power, the ability to
yeah.
choose our judgments of events.
And maybe the willingness to take risks or just kind of operate outside of the
100%.
traditional,
That's
9 to 5. I had just very briefly, I had we had a guest, Justin Roethlingshofer. He talked about when he was working for the NHL, the guys, this is not an entrepreneur related thing, but
Mm-hmm.
athletes in general, professional athletes, hockey players, I mean, they're willing to go out there and throw their bodies around. I mean, they take all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of risk there. And then they were prescribed all this medication. So you're setting them up for failure because they're already, kind of predisposed
Mm-hmm.
genetically, I'd say, to
Yeah.
taking more of a risk than maybe the person who's not playing hockey. Then you're giving them drugs. And so anyway, it just kind
Yeah.
of, I think the entrepreneur is maybe even more vulnerable in some sense to,
No question.
just from a biological, physiological standpoint, but also just the pressure that you're speaking about, and just because I've experienced that myself, as far as it's really hard to compartmentalize and just shut it off, especially
Exactly.
especially if you're working from home. But
Yeah.
so you've dealt with that, and not to get too
Yeah.
personal, but have you dealt with that personally, or like,
Oh
or
yeah,
is this more
absolutely. Oh,
okay?
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And it is part of what drives that is, I think, a few things. And of more recent vintage, this has been exacerbated by the the digital age,
Hmm.
right? By the overwhelm of information,
Sure.
by our capacity to absorb it. And entrepreneurs, we are, like, you see this, like, this is a registered trademark. That's permanent beta, right? We're always learning, never
Hmm.
done, always learning,
Yeah,
never done. So when there's
love that.
more information, guess what I want to do, Jamie?
Consume it.
Consume it, right? So,
Absolutely.
and so there's these, we've got to build some boundaries, man.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing a great job of that about, 8, 10 years ago.
Hmm.
And it affected me, man. It really did. And it allows me to be a better consultant, advisor, coach.
Hmm.
It's so much better because I know how that can manifest, and it's not healthy.
Sure.
It's not healthy.
Yeah, I was actually just mentioning to a friend last night that I've gotten into this mode where even if I'm working out, I can't listen to music. I've got to listen to a podcast, because I've got to learn, it's like,
Right.
chill out, man. Like, put
Chill
on some
out, man.
music.
Like, what are you
Uh,
doing? Yeah, like, what are
yeah,
you
I don't know.
doing, man?
Yeah. But,
It's so good that, yeah.
so what have maybe tactically speaking, what
Yeah.
have you put in place to put boundaries on your own professional life so that you can maintain a more healthy and
Yeah.
positive outlook on things?
Thank you for that question, because I don't know if there's a more important question. If you're an entrepreneur, if you are an organizational leader, I don't know that there's a better question than that, Jamie,
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
be answering authentically at this point
Hmm.
in time, right? Like, it's interesting. I've developed over time this philosophy that there's really, well, a rubric really, which is there's really an art, a science, and a philosophy to leading, right? And if you're not dealing with the philosophy and the science, I'm worried about you, right? And so what do I mean by that? Well, you had referenced this already, my friend, but when talking about the science part of this, and I've been doing some research with some Johns Hopkins, psychiatry department on this, which is mindset, right? And changing our neural pathways, choosing better habits, right? Our ability to actually choose our judgments of events that are happening to us, right? And it's pretty exciting research and understanding, because there is power in that. There is control that we can exert over that. Our responses, our judgments are up to us. The world doesn't care, right? The events are just going to keep coming. They're neither good nor bad. It's our judgments of those events. So that's the science part, right? And then the philosophy part, though, man, is permanent beta, which is I don't want to ever fall prey like I did for most of my life until about 6-10 years ago, of being so wed to a particular paradigm or a way of thinking, right? I'm so much better by testing my biases, by testing my thinking, and by making sure that I really monitor the kind of positive relational energy that I'm bringing to my organization, to my clients, to my family, to my friendships. Like, Jamie, we couldn't be talking about this 10 years ago. No one would want to care about this.
Right. Nobody would listen to this.
And it's certainly so 20 years ago, but even 10, even 10.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. So, that sounds good. And I 100% agree with you, but what does that look like for you personally on a day-to-day basis? How have you implemented that in your life?
Yeah. See, you've done this once or twice, haven't you?
I'm not letting you off the hook.
You've done this once or twice. A couple things that I would bring to light that I am so zealous about sharing with people. Number one, if I need to reset my central nervous system, recalibrate it, I do box breathing.
Nice. That's awesome.
So this
I just started breath work this year. So I've got my little thing right here I'm using, but
I mean, it's incredible.
So what is that for the listener who doesn't know what box breathing is?
Sure. And I tell you what, it almost feels a little bit like magic. It's to me, it is the craziest thing that it resets my central nervous system so quickly. Box breathing is it's taken from the idea of building the box. So you inhale slowly through your nose, filling your chest and diaphragm up, whatever that count is, it feels comfortable. For me, it's usually 6 to 7 seconds of inhaling. And then you hold for 6 to 7 seconds. Then you exhale slowly for 6 to 7 seconds. And then you hold again for 6 to 7 seconds. Just describing it to you calms me down.
Well, it's funny because you're absolutely right. Like, if you and I had been talking about this at Hopkins, we would have been laughed off the team. I mean, this is ridiculous, 100%. Right? I mean, this is crazy woo-woo stuff. And again, I'm not going to hijack the conversation, but I had a little incident myself in late December where I kind of had a panic attack, and haven't shared this on the podcast before, but super scary. And somebody who works with me sent me a tool for breathing, and I started learning more about this. And I'm by far not an expert whatsoever, but I thought this might be something I might try a couple times and then not give it any credence. I'm doing this every morning. It's a version of either box breathing or some other kind of breath work. I mean, this morning I was outside on the deck doing my breath work, and it's like, I just feel so much better after it. I mean,
thank you for sharing that, man. I mean, isn't it incredible, Jamie?
It's incredible. It's awesome. And you need 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, you don't need a lot of time to do this.
It's so accessible. It's so accessible. The only other thing that I've found for me that has even a small portion of that effect is journaling. So
Mm-hmm.
making sure that I'm in touch with my subconscious
Mm-hmm.
by writing things down. Like I will, with regularity,
Mm-hmm.
ensure that I'm writing things down, which
Sure.
helps me. It's cathartic, I suppose, for me.
Yeah.
But the only other thing I wanted to say that's really accessible, like the breath work,
Yeah.
is I have been doing a lot of reading on Stoicism.
Okay. Yeah. I've noticed
And
that on your website as well. So how does that work into your personal and professional life?
it is, I have described it as a operating manual for the modern leader,
Mm.
because even though these are, ancient Stoicism is,
Mm-hmm.
it's not lowercase s, it's capital S, right?
Mm.
So it is, I was turned on to a wonderful medium
Mm-hmm.
for this philosophy by a gentleman by the name of Ryan Holiday.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
part of my routine, which you asked about, every
Mm-hmm.
morning, every single morning, I read a passage from the Daily Stoic and I listen to the Daily Stoic podcast. They're very
Nice.
short. They're typically 10 minutes or less. And it
Nice.
is incredibly accessible guidance on
Mm-hmm.
focusing on the essential,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That's really good.
That is, I mean, Jamie, like it is,
Yeah.
I have shared this with other leaders and entrepreneurs and CEOs. They find a
Mm-hmm.
tremendous amount of value in it, as a continuous sort of objective bystander that
Mm-hmm.
helps you focus on essential, modulate your response, just really choose your judgments and opinions of things, as opposed to being taken for a ride and being
Mm.
out of power.
That's really good. Just, yeah, being intentional about it is that's really good. Yeah, I've read a couple of Ryan Holiday's books, and Ego is the Enemy and The Obstacle is the Way, I think, are the two I've
Yeah,
read. But
two awesome books.
yeah, for sure. So now I do have some rapid fire questions we're going to
Yeah.
get to, but have we kind of touched on, have we checked? I know there's other adversity you've dealt with, but we've hit the main ones, right?
Yeah, I think it's like this expectation adversity. There's
Mm-hmm.
this health and wellness adversity,
Yep.
and then there's this professional adversity and the gravity that comes with that as we have
Sure.
more responsibility and ownership. But you
Yeah.
know, yeah, it's and the more we have wonderful forum to discuss this, like this podcast,
Yeah.
the better served we are as leaders.
I love it. So you mentioned, now before I get to my
Yeah.
questions here, you mentioned you work with entrepreneurs, CEOs, leaders,
Mhm.
and oftentimes on mental health type issues. What other problems, besides that are specific to their
Yeah.
organization, but what other kind of themes or patterns do you see arise among the entrepreneur that you're constantly
Yep.
addressing?
Well, this will probably be affirming for many of your listeners, right? Here
Okay.
are the things that I hear about the most, that we discuss the most these days, right?
Hmm.
Which is, what is our priority? How do we can we be better at relentlessly prioritizing? Number
Mm,
two, how can I retain my best people?
that's key.
That might even be number one, right? That
Right,
might
right.
even be one,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And then the third is this care, clarity, and connection. How can I, in this age of distributed workforce and hybrid,
Hmm.
how can I stay connected? How can I be as clear as I possibly can in terms of
Hmm.
our mission, in terms of our strategic priorities, in terms of roles, right? And then how can I
Sure.
make sure that my team feels cared for?
I love it. Those are critical. Those are really good. All right. So rapid fire questions. You ready?
Let's go, baby.
Let's do this. What's one thing that people misunderstand about you, Chris?
I think they may misunderstand some of my energy for that. There's an incredible depth to it. It comes from care. It doesn't
Hmm.
come from a place of frivolity.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that's good. That makes sense. Um, what's one of your biggest failures, regrets? Just if you could go back and have a redo on something, what would that be?
I think one of my greatest regrets is not being more attuned to my emotional quotient earlier in my life, because I would have been better in certain relationships.
It's good. It's a great answer. If you could have coffee with any historical figure, who would it be?
Wow, dude, that is such a good one. Holy cow. So here, this will be an insight into my soul. Right now on my coffee table, I've got Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, and the Bible. So
Nice.
that would be an amazing
Yeah.
collection. Yeah.
Yeah, that's you'd have more than one question there. That'd be a fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
If you were given $10 million tomorrow, just not for your business or any particular purpose, just somebody wrote you a check, what would you do with it?
So one of the first things that I would do is I am the board chair for an organization called Next One Up, which serves young men ages 15 to 25 in Baltimore City. And it is a group that I feel deeply and care for deeply. And these are my heroes. These young men that are in this Next One Up program are my heroes. So I would use some of that money to ensure that we had a very, very long runway to continue to make more impact in the city of Baltimore.
Awesome. Really cool. Back to your profession, your industry, what's one challenge that you're facing in your own business right now?
Scale.
Scale?
Scale of me.
Okay. So you want to reproduce yourself or
Exactly.
Gotcha.
It's a really good, Jamie, it's a really good entrepreneurial question, which is we can't scale the founder. We have to scale the founder's mentality.
Sure.
So how do we do that? And so I've got a good plan, but it's just one of those things that you always think about, which is it's high performer syndrome. We want to do it all. And that's not doable. And it's not healthy.
Do you have a business coach?
Okay. I know a couple.
What's, in your opinion, one of the most important personality traits that is required to be successful in your industry?
Humility.
Humility. That's really good.
Yep.
Ego
is a leadership killer.
Don't let my wife listen to this one. All right. So let's see if you could try one other. I know you've had a couple of different kind of career type parts to your path, if you will, or different career options you've tried. What if you kind of tried something totally out of the blue, or something? If you had to try a different occupation and completely different than what you're doing now, what would that be?
Jamie, I'm probably cheating a little bit in this answer, but you'll appreciate this more than anybody is. It's an adjacent opportunity. I would be a full-time college coach.
Love it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did it for 1 year at Goucher, and unfortunately I had to pay the bills. So
yeah, right. Exactly.
Now, how about financial abundance specifically? I mean, we've talked about a lot of the adversity that you've dealt with. Let's talk about kind of abundance that you've reached, and you can kind of frame that in the financial context. What does that look like? What does financial abundance look like in your life, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah. A wise person told me 25 years ago to always have margin in your life, right? And this is margin in time, margin in money, margin in spirituality, margin in relationship. And so abundance financially is margin. And what I mean by that is that I'm not cycling on it. I'm not thinking about it. I've got margin, right? I've got margin to experience. I've got margin that I am not wondering if I can do that or not. That's
really good.
Yeah.
It's awesome. What is we've talked about a few books, but what's another book that you could recommend to my listener out there?
I would recommend, let's see, let me give you two, because a lot of your listeners are likely entrepreneurs, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So a great entrepreneurial book is Shoe Dog, filmed by Film Night. Yeah, that's
I actually just finished it. It's awesome. It's
Isn't
really
that
good.
awesome? I love it.
And my sister went to the University of Oregon, and she was on the first lacrosse team
Get
they just
out of
created.
here.
She was the freshman class, went all the way through together.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so there's the Oregon connection there as well. But yeah,
Yeah, that's
fantastic book, awesome story. It's
and
wild.
then I would say another great one is that I want to give it. I'm trying to think of one that's really, because I have like my over here in my office, I've got like my greatest hits of all the books that I
Yeah.
love the most. But that one's a really good one for your audience. And then
Yeah.
another one would be I would say I did like 0 to 1 by Peter
Hmm.
Thiel.
Gotcha. I
0 to 1 is
never
really
read that.
interesting.
Yeah.
Super interesting. And I do think it's interesting when you have people who have engaged with a ton of entrepreneurs, right? Like
Hmm.
Peter Thiel has, or like Mark
Hmm.
Andreessen has, or it's like I'm going to
Hmm.
listen to those guys because
Sure.
they've seen a lot
That's true.
of what has worked and what has not worked in terms of entrepreneurial leadership, right?
For sure. Absolutely. Um, as we wrap up here, Chris, what's talk a little bit more about your business, what that looks like, who you're trying to serve. I know
Mm-hmm.
you touched on it earlier at the
Yeah.
beginning, but what's it look like? What are the next few years looking like for Steer LLC?
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate that. And I think that we are incredibly fortunate to be able to work with members of our tribe. And that's who I feel a lot of your listeners probably are too, Jamie.
Yeah.
It's that these are leaders or owners, entrepreneurs of organizations that are trying to build better, right? And in order to do that, we have a game plan for modern leadership, because modern leadership is very different than leadership was even 10, 20 years ago. And so we like to really partner with leadership in terms of the art, which is really people, process, planning, but also the science and the philosophy of what it means to have an optimized organization, but more importantly, effective leadership. So we want to create value, brother. That's what we want to do. We want to create value and
Yeah.
have a positive impact.
Well, you're definitely somebody that's creating value. So drill down a little bit though before we head out of here. What does that look like? I know you have executive and leadership coaching, you have manager development programs, rising leader programs, strategic planning. What's it look like if somebody comes to you and says, "Hey,
Yeah.
Chris, I want to do better as a leader here."
Yeah. Yeah, no, great question. It's so on the one end of the continuum, you've got some of the executive and management development. We always work on a retainer basis, so we have which I always love to do as an operator and an entrepreneur, because I know that there's a value exchange. You've got to keep adding value, and I'll keep giving you consideration in terms of remuneration. That really works because it holds us accountable. If we're 6 months into the relationship and the value has been met, or it's not meeting expectation, that's really clean. So we operate in that way. And then in more substantive organizational development work, I would call it, that's also a retainer, but there's always a defined objectives and timeline to execute against what the objective is. And so in the instance of strategic planning, while that may feel very project oriented at first, it's once the strategic plan is built and constructed, now we have to execute against it, measure it, and learn. So how do we want that engagement to go, and how long do we think that should be? And so it's a very simple retainer model. And we have some unbelievable portfolio of clients, just so grateful. It's an iron sharpens iron situation, much like this conversation today.
I love it. So I know you're in the kind of outside Baltimore area in Maryland. Do you serve clients across the country?
Yes.
Got it.
Now, typically the HQ of those organizations really tends to fall between New York and Richmond.
Gotcha.
But these are often organizations that are national in scope and scale.
Got it. Fantastic. Yeah. So Chris Steer, where can our listeners find you online?
Oh, thank you, buddy. So find us at www.steerllc.com. Also, you can find my personal and my company page on LinkedIn. Is always a great place to go. I upload some good content
Yeah, you
through
do.
that vehicle as well.
Yeah, you put out some good videos and different things I've seen. It's always a very positive, uplifting, and informative content. So I definitely recommend the listener check that out. So awesome, Chris. Is there anything we have not covered that you'd like to?
No, man, I'm just grateful for you, Jamie. I'm so grateful that we're still connected after all these years. And much like you did 25 plus years ago, still creating value for the world, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Thanks for spending your time with us.
You got it, buddy.
And to the listener out there, thank you so much for spending your most valuable resource with us, which is your time. Thanks, everyone. Take care.